Okay, so welcome everyone. I just wanted to take a moment and recognise LinkedIn as a platform, which I think is absolutely astonishing. We've had 34 people sign up across 5 countries and 3 continents. Just absolutely staggering. So morning to some, afternoon to others, and evening to others again. So I'd like to go around and just do some very quick introductions to colleagues that are going to be speaking today. So as I get to each one, perhaps they can give a thumbs up or a wave. So first of all, there's Craig. Craig and I first met in 2009, where he was a key figure influencing the development of an incredible business transformation enablement tool. So I've worked with him, his team, his software a number of times, and without in any way wanting to steal your thunder, Craig, I think the ability to be able to work with stakeholders and do process-led transformation at the speed of a conversation is astonishing. Then there's Tony. Tony and I met in 2012, where I had the pleasure of being one of his students on my Master Practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP course. For anyone not familiar with NLP, I would describe it as a form of applied psychology for change, and it contains some of the most important communication skills that you may not have known that you needed. Tony runs the UK College of Personal Development, which has been helping individuals and organisations since 2005 with award-winning courses. We've also worked together on client engagements, not least helping a healthcare business to work out what was it that was the difference that made the difference between their branches that were incredibly successful and the ones that were not quite so successful, and how then can you turn that knowledge into tangible results from change. Last and not least, there's Darren, who's been working his magic behind the scenes to bring this event together. Very much the oil in the engine of the car. We'd certainly have missed him if he wasn't there. So our hope from this session is that there'll be a little bit of something for everyone. We've got some frameworks and ideas that you can use straight away. We'll also provide all of the meeting materials, so you'll have an opportunity to reflect on what you've seen during the sessions. What we covered today might be entirely new, it might be a different take on what you've already covered, or in some cases it might be reassuringly familiar. We'll transition between big picture for some of the context and perhaps challenge some of your ideas, and then dip down into the detail of the specifics. Now, none of what we say today is going to be the truth. It's our perspective, it's there for your consideration. And whether you're here for general interest or whether you've got a specific opportunity or perhaps a challenge in mind, we hope that what you'll find is useful. Darren's going to be taking notes of any questions as we go, so if you put them in the chat, I know that he's already had some submitted in advance. We'll aim to get through them all. If we don't, we'll pick up individually with people. So it's approaching 2 months ago that Darren, Tony, Craig and myself got together and we had the idea of running a session like this. And we were thinking, what would be the right kind of topic? And what we wanted was something which was going to be pertinent at a time of unprecedented change, something which people could really use in the here and now. So we settled on change is going to happen, how to harness it positively for your business, which is an idea and an opportunity that we all believe in. So before we kick off, and when we'd settled on that topic, I started thinking of a story. And many years ago, with FedEx as a global logistics business that probably we'll all be familiar with, probably we've all either been recipients or customers of them, they had 3 major logistics hubs in their North American operations. Every parcel, wherever it was from, wherever it was to in the States, would go through one of these hubs. Of course, they'd run various scenarios in terms of what could go wrong and how would they fix it. And on one day in the build up to Christmas, they found that a scenario unfolded which actually they hadn't prepared for at all. And it was worse than any of the ones that they had prepared for. All of the conveyor belts stopped at the same time, and the foreman was filled with anxiety and thinking, what do we do now? He reached out to all of the contractors only to find that none of them were particularly close. And so then he found an alternative contractor who was retired, but in the area, and said, yep, just up the road, happy to pop in, I'll be there very soon. As this guy arrived, he took his time, and of course the anxiety levels were growing for the foreman. And eventually the contractor walked down some stairs, across the floor, got to a patch panel, opened it, took a screwdriver out of his pocket and turned a screw a quarter turn to the right, and everything started working. The foreman was over the moon and said, "That's absolutely astonishing. I can't believe you've done that. You're a lifesaver. One thing I can do to show my gratitude is I can settle it now. How much is it?" And the response was $10,000. Now, the foreman was pleased, but he also felt that he was a little bit anxious about this kind of amount and he needed to justify it. So he said, "Look, I'm going to need an invoice, some kind of paper trail so that I can justify that kind of sum." The guy said, "Sure, no problem." A couple of days later, the invoice arrived, 2 line items. The first one was turn screw, 1/4 turn to the right, $1. The second one was knowing which screw to turn and by how much, $9,999. And that made me think about what we're going to talk about today. So if I share my screen. So is that big enough? Can everyone see?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to cover off a simple guide for breakthrough results. A little bit about me. At heart, I'm an entrepreneur. I had my first business at the age of 12. Unfortunately, it only lasted a couple of weeks because I was closed down by my primary school. It didn't take away the spirit, though. Several years later, I left university to grow what turned out to be a £1 million business. Now, the reason for saying this is that my approach tends to be very commercial, pragmatic, and results-orientated. And I started How to Change with the mission to help organisations do what may have seemed impossible so that people can deliver exceptional results, enjoy their work, and feel fulfilled. Over almost 20 years, I've worked with startups, mid-market businesses, and multinationals. Here are some of the clients and some of the nice things that one of them has said in particular. Now, why do we need to talk about change? There are 3 reasons. If you were to have a look at what Forbes have to say, they'd tell you that the most common reason for CEOs to lose their job is mismanaging change. If you were to have a listen to the Harvard Business Review perspective, they'd tell you that 70% of change programs fail. And what's interesting is, since that was published, several people have tried to discredit that. And what they've tended to find is actually that figure is an awful lot higher. If you were to listen to McKinsey, they'd tell you that on average, large projects run 45% over budget, 7% over time, and deliver 56% less value than predicted. So I guess the question at this point might be, well, why on earth would we change? But then we've got a problem. So conventional wisdom would say that when you only have one choice, you're a robot. You're programmed to do one particular thing, and that's the way it is. If you have 2 choices, you've got a dilemma. So in this case, the leader's dilemma is, do I risk extinction by being unable or unwilling to change, or play the numbers game and hope that I can beat the odds? At the end of the day, change is a risky business. So my view is that we need a third option to break out of the dilemma. Problems really are just opportunities in disguise. Their causes need to be understood. Once they are, then we can start to dig into how do we actually fix this. So my perspective is that 4 elements come together to create the perfect storm. First of all, change tends to be very, very poorly understood, poorly scoped, and poorly designed in most organizations. Next, and related, is that change itself is actually really poorly understood in terms of what it is and what it isn't. There are plenty of people ready to take advantage, and there's not really been a better alternative until now. So what is change then? So my perspective is change is everything other than business as usual. If you like, it's business as unusual. HR people might talk about a process like hire to retire, or finance people might talk about procure to pay. I talk about opportunity to outcome. Programs and projects are really just part of change, not the other way around. I'm just going to pause there for a second and say that again. Programs and projects are a part of change, not the other way around. What's interesting is an awful lot of organisations see that very differently. And change tends to be a work stream for a project or a programme, which unfortunately is a little bit like palliative care. Change as some kind of mythical individual or team is then the recovery agent when a poorly conceived and often poorly delivered project or programme has run into difficulty, and the change team is looked at and asked to make people feel better about it through some kind of tactical interventions like, can't you just communicate to people, or can't you do some training, or can't you manage those stakeholders a little bit better? Change can be unstructured. It'll always deliver an outcome. I guess the question is, do you want the outcome that it will deliver, or do you want to stack the deck in your favour? It'll also always create impacts. Years ago, there was a legendary football manager, a guy called Brian Clough, who was as famous for his team's on-the-pitch results as his off-the-pitch interviews. And in one particular interview, he was asked whether a goal should have stood, whether it was a legitimate goal. And one of the follow-on questions was a particular player interfering with play? And his response was, I would really hope that all of my players are interfering with play if they're on the pitch. Otherwise, what are they doing? And the same could be true of projects. If a project doesn't deliver impacts in at least one of the areas listed, and potentially others, what are we doing? So then we need to think, okay, so if projects have to deliver impacts, do we really understand what those impacts are and how to manage and structure appropriate, well-delivered interventions, or not? What are the established behaviours? So what are the things that reinforce the status quo in terms of some of those stats that we saw before? So first order of business tends to be that a change needs identified, and then someone senior in an organisation will say, right, who are our high-performing leaders and managers? Let's find one of those and give them the task of running the change. The difficulty there is that the mindset and the skill set required to lead and manage change are simply not the same as running a business. They can be taught, but they can't be guessed. The next thing that might happen is they might bring in a consultancy. Once upon a time, there was a scorpion on a riverbank looking to cross. He saw a frog and he said to the frog, can I climb on your back and get to the other side? And the frog said, you must be crazy. If you get on my back, you'll sting me and then I'll die. The response from the scorpion was, why would I do that? If I sting you, then we'll both die because we'll drown. The frog decided to say, okay, and on climbed the scorpion. Sure enough, halfway across the river, bang, scorpion stings the frog. And as the frog is bobbing under and above the water, he gasps for air and he says to the scorpion, I can't believe it. I said you were going to do that. You have done it, and now we're both going to die. And the response from the scorpion was, I can't help it. I'm a scorpion. That's what I do. Many of the traditional consultancies operate on key performance indicators, which are utilization, which is basically how do we make sure that everyone that's on our payroll is charged out and we're earning fee income on them, and account revenue growth, which essentially is what's the strategy and the numbers behind how we land and expand. The two of these individually, but certainly collectively, put most of these traditional consultancies at odds with what their clients want and need. And the final piece that sometimes happens is perhaps instead of a consultancy, or perhaps after a consultancy, there's a drive to bring in specialist contract resource, some of which potentially might be individuals that have been ex-consultants and they're deemed to have the knowledge, skills and experience that are required. The challenge here is when we think about how poorly scoped and understood most change is, and then we layer on the fact that many recruitment consultants have never actually been there and got the battle scars from delivering change, then we've got a situation where it might be a little bit like the blind leading the blind. We've got business leaders that don't really fully understand what it is that they need, and recruitment businesses that don't necessarily have the skills to be able to push back and make sure that the brief is high quality. So these things come together and these underpin the situation that we've got. Einstein would tell us that to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result is a definition of insanity. And yet this is what happens every day. Certainty is a human need, but is this really the certainty that leaders want? So we've got those stats again. And again, here is the need for a third option. So what should a third option provide? There should be consistent understanding and palpable engagement with the why. Change should be exciting. It should be the vehicle that delivers solutions and gets rid of problems. There should be an agreed upon set of well-defined and measurable outcomes. There should be strategic alignment. The change roadmap needs to deliver the vision. And then as a senior stakeholder, there are some perfectly reasonable questions and there should be perfectly reasonable answers. What's this going to cost? What are the benefits and when will I get them? What skills and capacity do we need? And for the UK, but also for several other jurisdictions as well, where there's something similar, how do we navigate this IR35 legislation that's coming? What are the unintended consequences that we might be signing up to? And how will I know whether we're on track? And then the final piece that always puzzles me is think about shareholder reports, think about annual accounts. You'll always see line items that relate to the exceptional spend. But how often do you see much in the way of justification of quite how well that spend has delivered a return from its change? Some organisations will say, well, what if we've already started? Is it too late? And my question back to them would be, are you 100% confident about the projects and programmes that you're running and the information that you get from reports and meetings? Below the multicoloured diagram, actually, it's predominantly red and amber, is what we found when one particular exec asked us to review his project portfolio. Down the side, the rows are project names, and across the top, there are critical success factors, which are all the things that really need to be in place to make sure that change is stacked up for success. And so you can see it's not a particularly pretty picture. What we'd have been hoping for is more greens, indicating that the things that were needed were in place, but actually pretty much across the board, they weren't. And so the confidence levels were quite low. There's a guy who was made famous by the book Good to Great by Jim Collins called Admiral Jim Stockdale. For 7.5 years, he was a prisoner of war in the infamous Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And he made it out when an awful lot of people didn't. He was interviewed and he was asked, what was the difference? Why did you make it out while other people didn't? He said, oh, well, that's easy. The ones that didn't make it out were the optimists. They'd set artificial timelines and they'd say, we'll be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd set a new timeline. We'll be out by Easter. We'll be out by Thanksgiving. And they'd come and they'd go and they died of a broken heart. He said, those of us that made it out were able to retain unwavering faith that in the end we'd prevail, whilst also having the discipline to confront the brutal facts of our reality. So every engagement that we do kicks off in exactly this way, and we call it the How to Change reality check. It helps clients to get beyond perception and get to the facts, and only by confronting those brutal facts can they really face into what needs to be done and how's it going to get done. So here's our process. Here's opportunity to outcome. It's broken into two main chunks. The first is the setup, which is the How to Change reality check. And then the final section is the implementation, assurance and support. We kick off, and the first order of business is establishing change governance. And I know there'll be several people on the call that when they see or hear the word governance, what they'll feel is, oh, here we go, this is all about bureaucracy, it's red tape, it's lots and lots of pointless, endless meetings. Actually, that's not what I mean at all. What I mean is simple, effective change governance, which serves the purpose to make it really clear who does what and why, and also facilitates information flow and decision making. What's the cadence of reporting in meetings that gets the right information to the right people at the right time in the right formats so that everyone can work effectively. The next thing then is determining outcomes, current state and scope. A fundamental belief of mine is that the answers always lie within the business. So that's why we don't need to wheel in lots and lots of consultants. That's why we tap into the wisdom of the crowd to be able to shape the change strategy and roadmap. The diagram on the left which looks a little bit like Robin Hood's been in town, has a selection of projects on the right, on the left, the blue ones, which are the enablers. So often these tend to be quite short and sharp. They're the things to lay the foundations to be able to then deliver the middle ones, which are the needle movers. These are the ones which deliver the substantial benefits. And then on the right, we've got what those benefits are. So we have clarity about what needs to be done to tee up what, to deliver what. And then on the right, we've got a diagram which shows a simple, usually a one-pager, which sets out in really succinct language. It's a 2-minute read. Why are we doing something as a particular project? What's involved? What are the outcomes? And what's not involved? And we make it nice and simple. The next piece then is creating the roadmap and plan. Essentially, we manage the details so clients don't need to. We've got a plan that translates the why and the what into how, who, and when. So who does what, how do they do it, when do they do it, and therefore how do we get the benefits? We provide exec-friendly visuals to present all the salient information. Then we move on to assessing the change environment and the impacts. So having done this for a while, we know what works, we know what doesn't work, and therefore we can check that the things that ought to be in place are in place. And we know that some of the other things that if they are in place might present challenges, we can check whether or not they're there. And then we look at the impacts and what we're going to do about it. And then during delivery, we provide role-based customizable dashboards to provide real-time actionable insights. The idea is that everyone should have, regardless of their role, the information at their fingertips so that they can see everything they need to know and what they want to do about it. And then the final piece then is closing the program. Now, by the time we close the program, we know that several things need to have been done. But actually, in quite a few projects, there's a focus on only one of these logical levels, as we call them. And I know Tony will touch on this in a little bit more detail later. So we know that to deliver change, you need to focus on environment, behaviours, capabilities, and then looking at some of the cultural aspects, the beliefs and values, the identity, vision and purpose. PricewaterhouseCoopers would say delivering a new system into an old organisation creates one thing and one thing only, an expensive old organisation. And the reason for that is that it's not that systems or processes or a new office space might not be important, but they're enablers of change. They don't deliver the benefits. They can't. It's people that deliver the benefits. So unless people have the behaviours to be able to turn that latent potential into bankable benefits, you won't get them. They only can practice those behaviours if they've got the skills, and they will only have the motivation and the application to be able to acquire and then deploy those skills if you've really made sure that what you're offering is something that's relevant and interesting to them. I talked initially about the results orientation and a commercial focus. So here are some of the results from the work that we've done with clients. 9% increase in like-for-like sales for one, a 30-point improvement in Net Promoter Score, which is a measure of customer advocacy, and all of the stats to show when that would then translate into bankable benefits. We helped a legal services business to integrate a newly acquired business ahead of time, 40% under budget, and unlocked a new revenue opportunity. We provided support to turn around the 70 million IT project, which had gone off the rails. It was actually the largest ever undertaken by a FTSE 100 business at the time. And we delivered a portfolio of projects to enable investors to exit, including creation of a blueprint for the model branch. This is the healthcare business that I mentioned that Tony and I worked on. We help organisations to do what may have seemed impossible, so that people can deliver exceptional results, enjoy their work and feel fulfilled. Underpinning that is a belief that leaders and managers in the 21st century need to be just as capable of changing a business as they are at running it. And so as well as consulting, we offer a range of modular solutions so that we can equip businesses with the capabilities and confidence they need for change. Here are some of the essentials modules, each of which includes training, templates, and support. How to motivate an organisation for change, how to establish effective and simple change governance, how to conduct change assurance, how to plan for change success, and how to manage the impacts of change. Any questions?
Dan, yep, we've already had several come in actually. Right. I've got one here from Katie. She said, I agree with Dan that change is at the top of the tree and projects and programs are the vehicle to deliver. But how do you take on the project management industry to change their perspective?
That's a great question. I suppose perhaps it's a build on what people do at the moment. That it may not be a case of taking them on so much as enhancing what's already done and helping to retain a focus on why do we need to do something, what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, and for what purpose. I don't know whether, Katie, that answers the question.
Katie, did you want to come in on that? Does that cover what you were looking for?
Yes, I think it does, Dan. I think it's slightly tongue-in-cheek question because we're not going to take on the project management industry. I've been doing quite a lot of work with project management organisations, and I think you have to do it from within. And although having a people work stream kind of goes against what you said, I think that's the place to start. And you perhaps influence around the subject and say, if people are going to have to work differently, then at your peril do you ignore the people side of change? And that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. But it never ceases to intrigue me that project managers say our job is to deliver time, cost and quality, and people are just not mentioned. And I think there's this gaping hole, vacuum, which what you're talking about would absolutely fill. So I think there's a lot of vacant ground to be taken.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Thanks, Katie. So next question was from Diane, and she said, what about change roadmap, brackets waterfall approach, and agile thinking?
Yeah, so I suppose my vantage point on this one is that when we talk about waterfall and agile, amongst others, they're delivery methodologies for different projects. And different methodologies will be the right or perhaps a better fit for different projects. I would always start with the stakeholder engagement of understanding what's important to people. So, what are the outcomes that people want? For what purpose? What are the problems and opportunities in today's world that want or need to be addressed? And how would we go about doing that to inform the high-level change roadmap? And then use the appropriate methodology to deliver each of the projects as the vehicle to be able to translate what wants to be done into how it gets done.
Thanks for that, Dan. We have got a couple more, but mindful of time, I'll just do one. And this one's from Tim. And he says, if we wanted an exploratory discussion with you, what would be the first stage and how best would we go about setting that up?
Yeah, great. So more than happy to do that. So my contact details are on the screen, but also happy to reach out. And then on the website, we've got the ability for people to sign up for an initial free consultation.
And the final remaining question we didn't quite get to cover here, we'll email that response out to that person.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Darren. Tony, Craig, over to you.
Get myself off mute. Even this long into the new way of working, and I still missed the mute button. Okay, thumbs up if you can see the slide. Brilliant, thank you very much. So I'll just do a little quick build on the very kind introduction that Dan did for me at the beginning there. I come from a background of technology, and then went and spent several years studying social sciences before actually getting into the world of business process management and process improvement. And I always sort of saw myself as a bit of a translator between the sort of technology side and the business side in any sort of change or transformation program. But I wanted to pick up on one of the quotes that Dan mentioned in his presentation, which was, I really like this piece about change always delivers an outcome, but is it necessarily the outcome that you want in the organization? And it reminded me of another quote that I've heard, and I can't tell you who it's attributed to, but it was from the work I've done around organizational design, which is that every organization is perfectly designed to give the result or deliver the results that it delivers. And so if you want to change what the organization delivers, you need to think about the components that make up that organization and look at the levers that you can pull in order to influence that change. And that's really the area that I want to look at today. And in terms of those levers, it's if we're trying to make a change to an organization, the most obvious levers we have are the people, the processes, or the technology, and what are the changes that we can make. But we really need to understand the relationship between those different pieces, because obviously just changing one of those without considering any of the others could have potentially a very negative impact. And so you often hear talk about how do we get those things to work in balance? And I want to explore that a little bit more in this session. But before I do that, I want to I'm just going to start with a bit of a story from the German retailer, or rather it's a global retailer based in Germany, Lidl, who several years ago embarked on a pretty ambitious systems implementation project with SAP. So SAP are an inventory management and enterprise resource planning software provider. They certainly dominate the global retail industry in terms of providing these systems. And Lidl were looking to replace their homegrown internal system that they developed with something that would sort of bring them much more up to date and really integrate their end-to-end systems, especially now that they'd sort of were sitting on a global stage working across multiple geographies. I really like the name of the project. When pronounced in German, the project was Project Elvis, which I thought was an interesting one, which stands for Electronic Lidl Merchandise Management and Information System. And it was a pretty big and ambitious program of work spanning multiple years. And they worked with SAP as well as an implementation partner. And actually to the point where SAP was so impressed with the work that they'd done as part of this program, they awarded Lidl their Best Customer Award in 2017. But here's the thing, just months after that award was delivered to them, the project was cancelled. 7 years into the project, and around 500 million euros had been spent on it. And they reverted back to their original systems. So what went wrong? Well, the most sort of commonly agreed issue in this program was what's often called the requirements gap. And that's the gap between how the system works off the shelf and the processes and ways of working of the customer organization, in this case Lidl. And now SAP provide a system, or they have developed a system and provide that based on best practice processes that they've learned over many years working with different organizations. And that doesn't mean that their system is perfectly suited to every organization. In fact, there's no one organization that it would work perfectly for. But what most organizations would need to do is to do some sort of customization to that system. What actually happened in this case is that Lidl decided that they didn't want to use SAP's best practice, but they wanted SAP to work in exactly the way they were working at that time, which was fundamentally different from the best practices in the SAP system. And what that did is that created an enormous backlog of requirements that needed to be developed and customized in the system. That led to a very long project. And of course, 7 years is really a ridiculously long time for such a change project. And what happened over that time, of course, there was several changes in leadership, and the world is constantly changing. So the environment was changing, supply chains were constantly changing, and that meant requirements were becoming more complex. The requirements list was getting longer rather than shorter as time progressed. So it got to a point where they said, actually, we'll just keep going forever without ever delivering anything. And what that demonstrates to me is at the core of that was a real lack of understanding from the two sides. And that's a sort of key piece. They clearly didn't get this balance between the different components, the people, the processes, and the technology within this program. And I want to go into that and explore that a little bit more, why that happens. So commonly we talk about this idea of people, process, and technology was often called the golden triangle. And we talk about trying to getting the right balance between these different pieces to make sure that they all work together in balance and in harmony. But when we present this in this way, where each of these components looks like it's equal, it's actually part of the problem. And what happens is because of that, certain groups within those areas start to dominate the triangle, and that different people from different areas start to compete for time, attention, and money. Now, if we take two of those pieces, the process and technology, if you think about, well, who do we go to talk about those sorts of things? They generally tend to be quite easy to identify. We can normally find quite quickly who are the process experts, hopefully in most organizations, or who are the technology experts. But when it comes to people, which is actually the biggest part of any change, what I've experienced in many programs is when it comes to the people side, is that who do we need to get involved? Someone will go, well, it's about people, so it must be HR. And no, it's not. HR may be certainly a stakeholder in this, but people is everybody, and we need to consider everybody. But because that group becomes so diverse and sometimes a bit generic, they don't always have the voice that they maybe need in this particular argument. Another thing that I've seen happen an awful lot is the technology comes to dominate, and that may be for a combination of reasons, but sometimes it's because a lot of the capital investment is going into integration partners, it's going into licensing, and because that has the biggest amount of money assigned to it in capex, then it starts to get the most focus at the detriment to the other two areas. And what I did when I was putting this presentation together, as Dan mentioned, when we met a couple of months ago to talk about this, I went out to talk to some of our partners to ask them, when they're thinking about change programs in terms of people, process, and technology, which is the area that tends to suffer the most. And actually what I got was a very diverse range of answers, and actually everyone had been on a project where one of those areas had suffered more than others. And it is just an example of some of my favorite quotes that I got from those conversations over the last month or so. They were too focused on the technology and forgot that real people had to use it. So that was a great example that actually came from another SAP implementation, unfortunately, but within a charity. And within months of the implementation, the actual users of the system had created so many workarounds because so many simple things just didn't really work the way that they wanted it to or needed it to. So they were actually spending more time using the system than they had done previously with their spreadsheets. The one on the top right there actually comes from a healthcare company, and here again they'd spent a lot of time on communication, or as they'd called it, the fluffy stuff, comms and talking to people about what they wanted and what they needed, but they hadn't spent enough time thinking about, okay, actually technically how is this going to work when we implement it and we get it up and running. And the one at the bottom is from another retailer, actually South African-based retailer. I love this quote from an analyst where they said, it's too often that process is seen as the poor little brother. And in this case, what had happened is that they had implemented or had delivered the system, and they were weeks away from implementation when they said, well, now it's time to go and think about the processes. We need to document these so that we've got them for the team once the system implementers had walked out the door. And of course, what had happened is as soon as they started documenting the processes, they started to find all sorts of requirements that had been missed or forgotten earlier on in the program. And so what I want to do here is really talk about a different approach, a different way of thinking about this people, process, and technology in order to really leverage the power of it. So I want to reimagine the golden triangle, if you like. And the way I think about it is more of a stack. And I put people at the bottom because people are by far and away the biggest and most important part, right? Without people, you cannot make a change. And I like the little discussion and the questions at the end of Dan's session there from Katie about too much focus on the project management, and people are often not mentioned. You cannot deliver change without people. So they're absolutely the foundation of what we're doing. But then when I introduce the people, process and technology, I actually see process as not an equal part, or technology is not an equal part to the other two. But process, I want you to think of process as the communication layer. And that's the bit that allows people to communicate, or the business to communicate what it needs from technology. And vice versa, it allows the technology experts or the technology vendors to be able to communicate clearly to people, this is how the technology works today, this is what we recommend, this is the best practice. And it's not about one dictating to the other about how it should work, but it's about having a very open and fluid conversation so you can really understand how it should work. But I want to highlight something else, that people piece is so big and actually very complicated. And what I've done here is just to sort of show you the types of stakeholders that we have within that group, right? We have staff or employees within an organization, and they're going to be incredibly diverse. You've got lots of different teams and departments who have very different areas of expertise, and will often speak a different domain language from one another. So, IT or compliance might speak a very different language to somebody in finance or supply chain, for example. So you've got, even within staff, you've got a very diverse group of people. Leaders and managers, again, have different needs in terms of how they communicate with others. And then you've got your suppliers and your customers. And all of these are trying to interact and talk about the same things and understand how they all relate to each other and how technology is enabling what they do. So we're using process as this a sort of common language or conversational layer. It's all about helping all of these people within the organization get alignment. So it's about being aligned on the problems that they have to deal with on a daily basis. So really understand an alignment and understanding on what those problems are, and alignment on what the potential solutions are going to be to make things better. It's about having a common language to be able to identify, describe, and discuss potential opportunities for change or improving things. And one of the things that so too often I think gets forgotten about in projects and programs is actually the constraints, really understanding what are the constraints that we have to deal with and work within to be able to deliver a successful change. So process should become this sort of common language that allows us to be able to do that. And again, I love the comments before in the previous session about change is not part of a project. Change is something that's ongoing. And if change is if we agree that change is a constant, then looking at process and creating a process framework that gives you a common language is not something that you do as part of a project. It might be where you set it up, but it's an ongoing conversation within the organization to ensure that you're continually keeping aligned, you're continually identifying opportunities for change, you're continually understanding the constraints that you're dealing with, and you're able to do that across all that diverse audience of people, and harness the power of technology as an enabler to deliver that. So how do we actually use process to create that common language? Well, it's all about simplicity, and there's lots of different tools and methodologies for defining business processes out there. And the example I put in here is one of the most common. And this one is a very powerful tool, but it's very, very powerful in a technology context. And actually, you can see here's just a selection of the different shapes and symbols to describe different types of processes. If we go back to that very diverse group of people that we're dealing with, this is not going to be suitable for everyone within that, but we still need some sort of common framework we can have a conversation about. And so the approach that we recommend is really powerfully simple, and we really take it back to the basics, and it's about really talking about the work that happens. So we define everything within a process with these simple questions. What happens? What is the work that you do? Who's doing that work? And perhaps most importantly, and what often gets forgotten about, is when I do a piece of work, I do it so that I deliver some sort of value either to the organization have I got approval for something? Sorry, did I have a question coming?
Lost you for a second, but you're back.
Okay. If I just go, did you see the bit about the complex process piece? And then I'll
maybe rewind 15, 20 seconds, something like that.
Okay, so I was just talking about the standard approaches to defining processes are often more focused on technical audiences, have lots of shapes and symbols, and are a little bit perhaps overly complex. What we recommend is an approach that's all about powerful simplicity. And so it's about really just talking about what is the work that happens within the organization. So what happens and who does it? So for each piece of work, who's doing that piece of work? And perhaps most importantly, when we do a piece of work, we should be doing it in order to deliver some sort of value to the organization or to our customers. So it's really important to think about, when I've done something, what do I have at the end of it? What do I deliver? Is it a document? Am I saving something to a database? Is it some sort of approval or sign off? Or am I delivering, am I increasing something or taking something away? Or what am I handing over to somebody else? And by keeping this very, very simple, it really enables this to be very conversational. So you can get groups of diverse people together and have these very sort of meaningful, focused conversations, which can happen very, very quickly. Using this simple building blocks, you string them together into process flowcharts that you might be more familiar with. But again, you're not having to explain to people lots of different ways of doing it. You've got a very common way of describing the key processes. And you can really put these together into all sorts of different frameworks that depend on the process that you're focused on, or the type of organization you're working with, or even the type of change project that you're delivering. But it's all about those kind of simple building blocks that you start with. We use the phrase mapping or changing or transforming at the speed of conversation, because you can really do this with a group of people. It really focuses minds. People can co-create their processes together and really sort of understand very, very quickly what those opportunities for improvements are, or identify those constraints that they need to deal with in the program. We've been using, I first came across this approach about 15 years ago. In a second, I'll talk about the product that we've built around it, but we've used it using various different tools to deliver it. And again, just talking to some of our clients over the last few months, or last 12 months or so, I picked out some of the quotes that we get of people using this type of this simplified approach to creating a common process language across the organization. So top one there is a logistics company that, again, we're doing a large systems implementation. They realized with 2 weeks to go before go live that one of the modules hadn't actually been configured and they didn't have the requirements. So when they went to talk to their internal process team, they were told that it was going to be a 6 week piece of work. This team actually picked up this simple approach, and within 4 days they were able to define the requirements they needed to get that system ready for delivery. The one on the bottom right hand corner is a digital transformation consultancy, and what they were talking about here is their initial discovery and investigation piece of work that they used to do before they would then go off and look at potential technologies for the customer. By massively reducing the time they would take to do that investigation, and what was actually happening is by using that simple language, they were really getting their customers to really open up and really understand their own business, and then really be able to talk very quickly about the problems that they experienced. By shortening that time, it gave them more time to focus on some of the innovation side piece of work that they would do, and that led to a drastically improved customer experience because the customers really enjoyed that additional time spent on the innovation. And there's a few other examples there. I mean, one of my favorites we've had recently is a large services company where the team had spent years trying to do this piece of work, 4 years in fact. And they decided to take a completely different approach, use this simple approach to define their processes, and within 6 months, what started out as a pilot, within 6 months they'd actually completed that piece of work with just 2 members in the team. So it's a real sort of proven results by essentially facilitating a much more open conversation with people across an organization. So a little bit of a plug about us. So the company's called Skore. We actually develop and provide a process improvement software. So the simple approach that I talked about, that will work with post-it notes on a whiteboard. It will work in PowerPoint, but we have developed a software platform that really makes it easy. So you can really have a conversation and map at the same time while you're doing that, just to create these processes. Our platform is quite advanced. It's about sharing, it's about conversations, and we've built in advanced analytics that literally show you insights into your processes as soon as you've started to describe them. We provide that a trial version of that software. So if you wanted to take a look at it, you go to our website, www.getskore.com. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is we have a very vibrant community. We have an online community platform. We run weekly community drop-in sessions, and we also run a bi-monthly networking session. And the next one's actually coming up this month on the 24th. And Katie, who was asked the question in the last presentation, will be joining us on that session with some other speakers. So again, if you want to join in that, it's a great way to meet other people, network, and learn from each other. That's on the 24th, and again from our website getskore.com/scrum, or look for the community section on there. Finally, if you want to connect with me, I'm very open to networking online. So LinkedIn, it's Craig J. Willis, you'll find me, or you can email me, craig.willis@getskore.com, or as our website is getskore.com. And on that note, I will stop for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Craig. So the first question comes from Eva, and she said, sounds like Six Sigma is a good approach for addressing and managing continuous change requirements.
Six Sigma. So Six Sigma is more of a scientific approach to gathering information about the processes. So it's a very powerful way of analyzing and improving processes, but it tends to be focused at teams who are experts in it. So you can apply it to any process within an organization, but the key part here is that you need to have a good understanding of those processes first of all. And that's essentially what we've been talking about here is, okay, how do we first create that baseline of how we understand, or how we as an organization believe the processes work today? Then you can start to apply tools like Six Sigma on top of that to really identify your improvements. I think it'd be pretty cool if you could bring the entire organization along on that journey to some extent, so that people could use tools like that more regular basis, but I'm not sure that I've seen it. Lean is something that maybe is more suited to a slightly wider rollout in terms of the tool set, because it's maybe a bit easier to apply in those in that context. So I hope that answers the question.
Right, thanks for that. Next one then comes from Laura, and she said, we already have processes documented in a variety of formats. Should we use these, or do you recommend that we just start again from scratch?
Oh goodness, that's a good question. I think that will depend on the quality of the documentation you've got. The thing about creating process documentation is that depending on who's creating it and at what point in time it gets created, it will perhaps have been done for different reasons, right? So it could, if it had been done purely for a systems implementation project, it might be that your processes are very focused on the technology side. Or if it was done for maybe a compliance piece of work, they may have been very focused on what was important to that particular project at the time. So I think in that case, you'd probably have to do at least a high level assessment of the quality of that documentation. And I would look at some sort of simple ways of measuring it. It's like, okay, is it simple enough for a wider audience to understand? Could I show it to somebody and they could pick it up and read it easily? Is it up to date is another thing that I'd look at, because often documentation gets created, put in a drawer and forgotten about. And if you go back to the slide I had before, if changes are constant, process needs to be a constant conversation. So your documentation needs to be simple enough that it's easy to update, but it needs to align with where things are today. So again, you need to think about that, because if it's miles out of date, then it's probably not suitable anymore. But there's a couple of tips that I would certainly start with before considering chucking it all out and starting again.
Thanks for that. And the final one before we come on to Tony is people in our organisation, this is from Anthony, people in our organisation are generally resistant when we talk about processes. Do you have any suggestions for how we can turn this into a positive?
That's certainly a challenge that I've come across in the past. One of the things I really actually quite enjoyed when I first came across this, taking this simple approach to process, and this is something we still experience from time to time now, but something I really enjoyed was you would set up a session, the inevitable, right, we need to map a process, let's get people in the room, and people would come in and they'd sort of sit down, arms folded, and it would be I've had process done to me before, or I'm really busy, I've only got 5 or 10 minutes. When we start having that conversation and taking just those simple steps, okay, well, where do you start, where do you finish, what is it you do, who does it, and when you do this thing, what is the value you deliver at the end of it? With those simple questions, you generally see very, very quickly that people switch on, and what you're enabling them to really sort of tell you what they do, but also tell you about all the things they find challenging. And because you're doing it in a very simple and common language, then other people in the room sort of start to jump on and get involved as well. And the amount of times I've had it where people will say, well, I've only got 10 minutes, and an hour and a half later, they're sort of stood in front of the board pointing at things and getting quite excited. So it's about getting them involved really, and you're getting them engaged.
That's super. We have had one extra question in from Diane, but if I may, what I'll do is perhaps ask that one of you all at the end, because it's about sustainability, so possibly a good one to get everybody's perspective.
Okay, thank you. So we stop my share and hand over.
Yep, there's a thumb up, so that's pretty good. So hello there, my name's Tony, and I head up UK College of Personal Development, and we are an open program deliverer of qualifications, personal development, CPD, and all that kind of stuff from a plethora of different types of accrediting organizations. Plus we work sometimes with other people, as the example Dan's given already, which I'll touch on in a minute, plus lots and lots of other organizations who want to improve the skills of their teams. So I'm going to be spending 20 minutes or thereabouts, hopefully I'll get it in all in on time, exploring logical levels of change. So logical levels is a widely used model from our point of view, from NLP and coaching point of view, for enabling change either for an individual or a small team or indeed a bigger organization. And it's one of the models, it's probably my second or third go-to model for any change work that I'm involved with. So just like the two previous speakers have said, change is a constant. We often say, you know, there used to be two things that were certain in life, death and taxes, but we would now add this notion of change. And just like, you know, you can see in this slide here, if you don't, what happens is the good people that you have will go where the change and the good things are happening. The innovation, the new ways of working, the slicker skills, and all of those kind of things. Because that's what drives innovation. That's what drives your profits in the organization. That's what drives productivity and all of those things that any team or organization would want. So from our point of view, when we're thinking about any sort of change or something new that's going to happen in a team or an organization or even with an individual, is to be very, very clear about the outcome. Because the minute you start on that process, you'll get lost in process if the end destination is not clear. So, you know, the quotation we might use is begin with the end in mind, but be very, very clear about the reason for undertaking the change or for making some kind of development work within a team or an organization. What's the outcome? What do we want to see at the end of the process? So here's the overview of the logical levels model. So start off in an environment where people are doing the actual work in the organization. And in that environment, we've got opportunities or constraints. In the context of that, there'll be behaviors, actions and reactions to whatever's going on, especially if a change is being implemented or quote unquote forced on people. And then we've got their skills and capabilities that they may or may not have or believe that they don't have, emotions or intellect, and able to respond accordingly. And those first three, what we might call small c change, and above that we get this large C change, beliefs, values, the identity or the vision of the whole organization or the team, where they want to be going with their teams, their organization, their products, their services, and so on. So a quick way of remembering logical levels is I can't do this here, here being the environment, this being the behavior, skills being the doing, can't, beliefs and values, and I being the identity. And above that, we have the vision or the mission of the organization, the why or the what for. So I'm just going to go through these in a little bit more detail and then sort of tie into what the two other previous speakers have mentioned. So the first thing is the environment. So in my experience, if you don't think about the environment when you're implementing any change, you're going to run into problems. And the reason for that is because that's where people are at. And when we say about changing the environment, this doesn't mean wholesale transplanting organizations or teams from one office or one location to another. It can be minor changes within that environment that enable and support the change process. So Thomas Leonard, who's considered to be the father of the modern coaching industry, he has this notion, or as he calls it, his mantra, the environment always wins. And without significant environmental design to implement and support that change process, it's not going to be sustainable. And the reason being is because the inertia of the organization that's related 100% to the context of the environment. If you go back to the same desk with the same computer, with the same software, with the same processes, with the same rules, with the same culture, guess what's going to happen? People will just remain the same. It's about changing the whole situation. Now, the other previous speakers mentioned about alignment. So logical levels is a lot about alignment, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So within the context of environment, we have our behaviors. So behaviors include actions, reactions, the doings of whatever it is that we are involved in that's related to the task in hand, production, service, or whatever that is. Now, behaviors are a key part of change because they're related to culture and how people see themselves and how they don't see the change being of benefit to them. So when we talk about behavioral change within a context of making some kind of environmental or business change or team change, it also includes, we have to include what might have happened if the outcome was clear or communication wasn't poor or not so poor, because they're two of the key things that have a big impact on implementing a change program. And I'll give some examples of that in a moment. Sitting above behavior, we've got skills and capabilities. And this is often something that gets overlooked in a change program. Do people have the skills or indeed the capability, and I would include time and the space, mental space, the physical space to be able to implement whatever that change is. Dan mentioned about the health provider that we'd worked together on, and that was one of the key things. There's the skills that people had or didn't have in some cases, and the capability of implementing whatever needed to be done to improve performance across the board, which in fact was related to the next level, which is around beliefs and values. And in fact, in the modeling work that we did to produce the model for training, for recruitment and all of that for this healthcare provider, this was the key. It was the values that people brought to the table and the beliefs they had about the work they were doing and the contribution it was making, to the company, but also to the end clients that were receiving the care from this healthcare provider. The beliefs and values of any team is going to have a massive impact on how any change program is going to be implemented, and regarded as successful or not successful. And again, this is around culture and how we see ourselves and what we believe ourselves. Because beliefs, it will affect everything. It'll affect the skills, because if I don't believe I can do it, I'm not going to do it. If I don't believe that's who we are, we're not going to do it. If I don't believe we can change our behaviors and move forward, it's not going to happen. And likewise with the environment. And as you can see here in this slide, what we always remind everybody, in every belief, there probably is a lie. So that cultural difference, that belief system is super important. And above that, we talk about our identity. Who are we in relation to the change? So this is who we are right now. This is how we're working. This is how our customers perhaps perceive us. This is how the team or the organization, they see themselves when they look in the mirror. Who are we going to be at the end of it? What does that look like? And do we really want to go on that journey? What's the payoff? And that comes back again to the notion of having a very clear outcome. What's the outcome? The why of the thing. Why are we going to do this? For what purpose? This change. And so if you think about logical levels in this fashion about results, the strategy that's required, the knowledge that's needed or that needs to be implemented and taken forward, the core values of the team or the organization, and who we're going to become at that level, the identity level, and for what reason. What's the reason for doing this? Once the outcome is clear all the ways along, you have alignment. And this notion of having alignment is one of the key things I always look for in any organization that I do some work with. So I've got a couple of examples. So the first example was in a high street retailer, a well-known high street retailer, a global organization. They asked us to come and do some work for them around coaching key members of the management team to implement some kind of small cultural change that they had across the board. And this notion was really about introducing a coaching culture into the management skill and leadership skill set so that they could bring people forward in any change that would happen in the future. On the face of it, that's actually a good idea and something I would recommend. However, pretty much a day or two into the process, we bumped into something, and it was people saying, yeah, this is not who we are. This is not what we want to do. This is something new. And so the outcome they had in mind was great, but the thought that some of these managers and leaders had to change their behavior or learn some new skills was like an alien concept. And so the whole thing fell over. And interestingly, when I revisited that quite recently with sort of a chance conversation with a colleague, the pain point that they were trying to head off at the past, so to speak, has become a massive problem in that organization. So they were clear about what they wanted to do, but they weren't prepared to make the changes to create alignment in the organization. And then here's another example. So the European Super League, some time ago, a bunch of people wanted to get together and create a sort of a closed shop. They thought it was a great idea financially for them. But actually, when I saw this on the news, I thought, well, this is doomed to failure from the start. And why would that be? Well, it's because so many people have a stake in football. They have an emotional stake in football. So where they go, that environment is part of them. They feel they're part of something. The behavior of the guys on the pitch, that they will talk about that forever and a day in the skills, but even higher up, the beliefs and values that football fans have in relation to their team, to the game, are hugely powerful. It's right up there about our identity. This is who we are. So it was doomed from the start because those people were just thinking about one thing, themselves and the bottom line. And so it wasn't in alignment, it was against and bumping up against all of the other factors, all of those other elements, all these other levels within the organization. So this is what we talk about. We talk about alignment. So where and when are we going to make this change? And we might say, and for what purpose? And then what specific behaviors do we need to change or develop or nurture that will support this new outcome, this change process, this new way of behaving, this new system, whatever that change that's being implemented is? What skills and capabilities do we have that we can leverage, or what are missing? What skills and capabilities do we need to introduce? Now, from my point of view, the thing that's always missing is the ability to communicate in a way that's very, very clear. So in the previous speaker's slides, which are really, really powerful, is this notion of bringing the people with you, but communicating at different levels for different groups. As he pointed out, the people in HR are going to have a very different communication channel or model to those working in IT. And so often the training that's required is getting people to understand their model of the world and how they can communicate in a way that supports everybody on that journey. And then the values and beliefs above that, this is the why of the thing. Why are we doing this? Is this aligned with me? Do I really believe in this? Is this good for me? Change always brings our pain. Are we going to lose our jobs? Is the company going to be safe? What's really going on? Again, this goes back to the core thing of communication, reassurance, and bringing people with you on that journey. Then at the end of it, who are we going to be at the end of this process? If we go back to the example Dan gave of the healthcare provider, the who they were and their other beliefs and values, that was key to turning that business around, where we modeled the excellent centers from the ones that weren't doing so well. That template was the thing about who we are. I wouldn't treat my grandfather like this, therefore I won't treat these other clients like this. This is who we are. And then the top thing here for what else? Why are we doing this? Where is this going to take us? What's the payoff? Who will we be in the way into the future? Is this part of the vision for the team or the organization? So logical levels is one of the key tools that comes from success factor modeling that Robert Dilts developed with his brother some time ago. And it's one of the key models that we teach on many of our programs: coaching, personal development, change management, plus of course, we deliver within organizations that we deliver any kind of change process. So thinking about the future, if you were thinking about, right, what kind of skills do we need? Love to chat to you about that. All the contact information is on there, and happy to have any kind of conversation about any element of the things that we provide: coaching, leadership management training, all of those kind of things. Really, really happy to discuss that in any way, or maybe even come along to one of our open programs and just dip in and see if you like that sort of thing. And we're more than happy to help in any way that we can. So that's pretty much for me, and I think I've done it in my allotted time. So any questions, happy to answer them now.
Thank you very much, Tony. We've had a couple submitted already, and people can obviously still let us have questions if they want to during the chat. We'll also then have a few questions, just two questions I've had so far that people have asked that we put to you all. But starting with yours, Tony, the first one comes from Tim, and he says, what key management or leadership skills do you see as being key to managing change?
Okay, that's a good question. Honestly believe the skill of coaching as a management methodology is essential for leaders, so that we talk about the coach leader, and for managers on a day-to-day management task, running the team, being able to empower their team by using coaching questions and coaching methodologies is super powerful. And that will also help develop communication skills and ensure that people know that they're going in the right direction.
Thanks for that one. The next one is from Laura, and she says, we've heard from all three speakers about the importance of getting buy-in from teams. As you're from a training organization, what do you see as the best ways of getting buy-in from teams when setting out a change program?
Well, I think the first thing is communication, and people resist change because they don't know what's in it for them. Where's this going to take me? Am I going to lose my job? Is this going to be painful? Am I going to be asked to do things I can't do? Am I going to be asked to do things that I haven't got time to do? So I think communication is very, very important. But having that outcome so crystal clear, people can see it. They go, oh yeah, I get it. Of course, I've got buy-in. I see it. Yeah, of course we should do this. Where do I sign? I'm good to go.
Okay, super, thank you. So that kind of concludes the two questions that we'd had pre-submitted for you. We've now got a couple, and I'll put the first one to you, if I may, and then invite the other guys to come back in. And it was from Diane, and she said, how would you include sustainability, put in brackets ESG, into change projects?
Wow. I guess it depends on what you mean by sustainability. So if it's about sustaining the company and the growth of the survival of the business, I'll use myself as an example. So when lockdown happened last year, we looked into the abyss because our primary business was delivering training programs in person in class. And so talk about rapid change. We were very clear about our outcome, which was to survive in actual fact. So we had to very, very quickly understand and communicate to the team why we had to take everything online and what that would mean to them, their families, they're paying their mortgages and all of those kind of things. But once everybody understood it, because trust me, there was a lot of resistance, actually some of the resistance from me, I wasn't particularly keen on it in the first instance. But once everybody understood it and it would work and we tested software to the point of obsession, it was fine. And in fact, it's been a success for us, the whole process. If you're talking about sustainability in the wider world, the ecology of the planet and so on, that's obviously a much bigger picture. And that's about understanding the impact that your business has on whatever it is you're doing, the environment. So I'll use myself as an example again, the college. We now obviously use a lot more servers and electronic equipment because we've become a digital online training organization. So we looked at what we could do. And so we approached a couple of different organizations that help with this kind of thing. They calculated the amount of carbon that we produce for all our servers and computers and emails and all that kind of stuff. And so we plant the appropriate amount of trees around the world. There's different projects around the world and we finance that. And that offsets our carbon footprint. So I think, for us, because we're a small organization, we can do that quite nimbly. For larger organizations, my guess is they might need to do a lot more research because we found the answers reasonably quickly and just asking the right people, how do we fix this? So hopefully that's an answer that works.
Can I jump in here? I had a smile on my face when I heard the question because it's an area that I'm very interested in at the moment, and we've actually got a couple of conversations with some ESG consultants at the moment looking at this. I think that to me this is all about raising awareness for organisations. Now, part of the challenge I see or hear when I talk to the consultants is, Tony gave a good example when we looked at your servers, you had someone come in, you gather all this information to understand like how much power are we using, what's the carbon footprint. Of course, ESG covers not just environmental, but it also covers societal. So what things are we doing? Are we helping society in general? Are we doing work with charities or giving back to the community, all of those sorts of things. But there are some quite well-defined frameworks in terms of this is what you should be measuring within an organization. And I think that what organizations need to do today is to get better at measuring that information, because the challenge is today, what happens is you go and hire an expert and they come in and they say, right, we need that information, and they fill up a bunch of spreadsheets and then produce a report. Really what organizations need to do is become much more aware of that stuff they should just be measuring as as part of the course. And it goes back to, I think, one of the things that Dan said right at the beginning of his session, which is about setting up the governance for the project. I think organizations need to be thinking now about how they set up the governance for this. And then once you start capturing that information, you then start to learn, okay, oh goodness, it's a bit like a smart meter in your house. As soon as you put the smart meter in, you suddenly go, oh, wow, now I know what it means when I leave the light on or I leave the heating switched on. And you create that awareness so people then start to become aware of the problem.
Dan, did you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to offer something practical. So what an awful lot of change programs do is they will start off, and again, this is the kind of slightly bizarre situation where a project is being delivered and then they wheel in the change people and they say, right, go and tell everyone. And at that point in time, of course, outcomes are predefined, usually by a small group of people, which isn't really representative of the organization. The first thing that we do is we go out and we do one-to-one stakeholder interviews to really understand, using a process called Skore, what are the outcomes that are important to each of the individuals, what's the significance for them as an individual and also in their professional capacity, what are the kind of challenges and missed opportunities of the moment which support the status quo, and then what needs to be done to be able to bridge between where they are and where they want to be. And from those conversations, an awful lot of information comes out, which is very personal to the individuals. And a lot of stuff comes out to do with sustainability. And that then gets wrapped up into usually another very punchy document, a couple of paragraphs on what is the vision for the future with measurable outcomes, and how do we know that we've succeeded with what we were trying to do, which usually is made up then of a number of different projects and programs. And then what are some of the challenges of the day? So my view is that by running that kind of process, and it's no more complex than ask people what's important to them, and then look for ways of being able to meet those needs. And where you can't meet those needs, be really clear with people and manage those expectations. That's where we tend to find that whether it's ESG or whether it's financial performance or any number of different criteria, they start to really come out.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. So we have one final question that Katie emailed in overnight. I'm going to suggest we take it in the same order. So go Tony, Craig, and then Dan, you can wrap up if that's okay.
Okay.
So the question from Katie is a question I have wrestled with is how do you help organisations see the benefits of having change management capability as a discipline? I would see it as a differentiator, but it's quite a hard sell. What tips do you have?
Yeah, tips. Well, the thing is about discipline is about habits, isn't it? And people will only develop a new habit if they see what's in it for them, i.e. what's the payoff. If I'm going to develop a new habit, if I'm going to start the habit of getting up in the morning, going for a run or going to the gym or whatever it is, or eating lettuce instead of chips, what's the payoff? For what reason this outcome or this process of change? You'll only develop a discipline if you see the reason for doing it. And that just goes back to, I think what all three of us have said, communicating the reason for doing something, for developing this habit of looking at what can change, how can we improve? The thing about the modern world is it's changing so fast, technology, society, and all those things. If you haven't got that mental, I guess, agility to flexibility, we say in NLP, one of the pillars of success is flexibility and the acuity to see when you need to change and how, what's the reason for doing it, and the how part, you're going to crash into the rocks. So I think really it's about getting people to understand that this is the world that we live in and developing that habit, that discipline of looking at how can we grow, how can we change and develop. Actually, I'm just reminded of many years ago when I was in recruitment, one of our customers was Tesco. And I met with one of their senior managers and he said, well, the mantra that I want you to take from me right now for you to be our service partner is how can we be faster, cheaper, quicker, and save money? Because that's the world that we live in. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a discipline that they've developed for themselves to grow their business, which has made them, a huge organization. And that reminds me of the success factor modeling, remembering the team, be clear about what you're providing to your customer, and just maintaining that sort of mental agility and flexibility to continue to grow and adjust and adapt. If you don't adapt, you die, I guess.
I'd go back to, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, Dan, but there was a quote you had in your slides, which I think you attributed to Einstein, which is I think the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again. And I think an approach you might take is go, okay, how successful were the last 5 projects or programs we did, and if they were all successful, then maybe you don't need any additional change management capability. But actually, if they were big question marks over any of them, then the question is, okay, if you carry on doing this the same way, how can you possibly expect different results? So it's the question of, if we don't implement this, what's going to happen? Because our competitors probably are.
Yeah, that was word for word. I'm kidding. So, yeah, I think to answer and then also to wrap up, I'm going to pick up on something that Tony said in terms of a lie inside every belief. But then also perhaps something that I mentioned in terms of what is the definition? So how do we regard change management? Because I suppose if we look at it as an object that you could put in a shopping trolley, why do people buy change management? Well, a lot of that's going to come down to how they define it and what they believe that it is. So if we're looking to build brand awareness of something, we need to start with what is it, why is it going to be a useful thing for me? And at the moment, I strongly believe that an awful lot of organisations really struggle to define change management, which is why they tend not to necessarily apply it, to answer Katie's question, because it might be easy to assume that the signs and symptoms of some of the challenges that they face are down to something else. So assumption, I suppose, is another word for belief, and therein lies the hidden lie. So thank you to Tony, thank you to Craig, thank you to Darren, thank you to everyone that's attended, the questions in advance, the questions throughout. Really appreciate everyone's time. Hope that it's been a good investment of your time. And we'll drop out all of the meeting materials. All of us are really happy to take any further questions offline. And then if it's anything that we can help with, really delighted to do so. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.